Robert Walker had been part of the Iron Legacy Riders for over 2 decades. He had ridden through deserts and snowstorms, through quiet towns and roaring highways, and he had stood beside his brothers during some of the hardest moments of their lives. But nothing in all those miles could have prepared him for what he heard that day in the hallway of Springwood Middle School. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon in late November, just past 1:40 in the afternoon. Robert had taken the day off work, picked up 2 tickets to the State Motorcycle Expo, and decided to surprise his son, Ethan, who had just turned 13. Ethan was a quiet kid, bookish, curious, always asking questions about space, engines, and how things worked. He was the kind of child who fixed broken radios just to understand them better, and who once cried when a bird hit their window. Robert had called ahead, checked in at the front office, and clipped on the visitor badge. He walked down the main hallway, lined with colorful student art and banners about kindness and achievement. He was heading toward room 214, where Ethan was supposed to be in health class, when he slowed his steps. From behind the partially open door of the classroom, a voice cut through the quiet hallway, sharp, cold, and condescending. "Maybe if you spent less time daydreaming and more time paying attention, you would not be such a disappointment to everyone in this room." Robert froze. He recognized the voice. Not his son's, but an adult's. The kind of tone he had not heard in years, but one that was hard to forget. He took a step closer, his boots suddenly silent on the polished tile floor. And what he heard next made every protective instinct inside him rise like a storm. Robert did not barge in. He simply placed his hand on the door and pushed it open with steady control. His 6'2" frame filled the doorway, casting a long shadow across the room. 25 students turned to look, eyes wide, pencils frozen in midair. At the front of the class stood Ethan, his head bowed, shoulders hunched, hands clenched tight by his sides. Across from him, standing like a judge passing sentence, was Coach Darren Wells, the 8th grade physical education instructor who, due to a scheduling change, also taught the health class. Robert scanned the room once, eyes sharp but calm, and ignored the teacher's startled expression. Ethan looked up and blinked. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether he was imagining his father standing there. Then something in his face shifted. Relief, disbelief, and a flicker of shame. Robert walked forward, his voice steady but low. "Get your things," he said. "We are leaving." Ethan did not ask why. He did not argue. He turned, walked to his desk, and began packing his notebook and pencils with shaking hands. The room stayed silent, except for the soft scrape of his backpack zipper. Coach Wells stepped forward, his tone suddenly formal. "Sir, you cannot just remove a student from my class without following school procedures. If you have concerns, you can schedule a meeting with the administration." Robert turned his head, his eyes locking with the teacher's. "I saw what I saw, I heard what I heard, and we are done here." As they walked out, Coach Wells called after them, his voice rising with disbelief. "This is not over. You cannot just disrupt a classroom like this." Robert paused in the hallway and glanced back. His voice was low, calm, and resolute. "You are right. This is not over." They walked out into the crisp afternoon air without another word.
Back at home, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, a mug of hot chocolate untouched in front of him. Robert leaned against the counter, arms crossed. He had learned not to push his son to speak before he was ready. Silence filled the room until Ethan finally whispered, "It started in September." His words came slow at first, then faster. He spoke about how Coach Wells dismissed his questions with sighs, mocked him in front of classmates, and made him stand while being criticized for asking too many questions. He spoke about how the teacher would laugh sarcastically when Ethan made mistakes, and how other students began avoiding eye contact out of fear they might be next. He says I slow down the class, that I will never amount to anything, that I should stop trying because I'm a burden, Ethan said, his voice cracking. Robert kept his jaw tight, his breathing even. Did you tell anyone? He asked. Ethan nodded slightly. I told Mr. Hughes, my homeroom teacher. He said Coach Wells just has a strong personality, that maybe I need to toughen up a little. Robert stepped forward and sat down across from his son. He reached out, placed his hand on Ethan's, and said with quiet strength, That is not tough love. That is abuse, and you are not the problem. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was just being sensitive. Robert shook his head. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. That man failed you. The school failed you. And I failed you by not seeing it sooner. But I see it now. And I promise you this. No one talks to you like that ever again. Not on my watch.
Robert did not sleep much that night. After Ethan went to bed, still shaken but more at peace than he had been in weeks, Robert stood alone in the living room, looking out the window into the cold darkness. The street was quiet, the town still. But inside him there was a storm that refused to settle. For years he had been a man of few words and clear action. And tonight, that clarity returned. He reached for his phone and scrolled through the contacts until he found the one labeled Diesel. He tapped it, and the call rang only twice before it was answered. Diesel here, the voice growled on the other end. Robert said only, It's Walker. I need the brothers. Someone has been hurting my kid. There was a pause, but no hesitation. Where and when, came the answer. Robert gave the school's name, the time, and said, We do not need a fight. We just need to be seen. Understood, Diesel replied. And that was it. By mid-afternoon the next day, the parking lot at Springwood Middle was no longer quiet. At exactly 3:30, the first motorcycle pulled in, a road glide with chrome so polished it reflected the sky. Diesel swung his leg off the bike and stood near the entrance, arms crossed, sunglasses fixed on the double doors of the school. 2 minutes later, 3 more bikes rolled in. Then 5, then a dozen. By 4 o'clock, there were over 50 motorcycles lined up in silent formation. Robert arrived not long after, walking slowly past the rows of machines and nodding to each man. No one spoke loudly, no one raised a sign. They simply stood, mechanics, veterans, small business owners, nurses, retired officers, and even a few teachers from other districts, lined up in denim and leather, arms crossed, expressions calm but unshakable.
Inside the building, students pressed their faces to the windows. Teachers paused mid-lesson, unsure what to make of the growing crowd. At 4:15, the number had reached over 70. The steady rumble of new engines arriving rolled across the pavement like thunder. The sound was not meant to intimidate. It was meant to wake people up. Robert stood near the front, not saying a word, but his presence said more than any speech ever could. Officer James Morales, the school resource officer, stepped outside. He had worked in the community for over 15 years and recognized many of the men. Robert, he said carefully, keeping one hand near his radio, but not using it. What is going on here? Robert's voice was steady. My son was emotionally abused by a teacher for over 2 months. I witnessed it myself. The school brushed it off. We are here to make sure that does not happen again. You planning to make trouble? Morales asked. No, sir, Robert replied. We are just here to be heard. That is all. By 4:30, the count stood at 97 motorcycles. 97 men and women stood shoulder to shoulder. No shouting, no chants, no confrontation, just presence. Their silence was louder than any protest. It said, "We see you, we are not leaving, and we are not alone." Then, something unexpected happened. Parents began to show up. Not just one or two, dozens. Some had heard rumors, others had received text messages, but most came because they saw the bikes and wanted to know why. And when they learned, the stories began to pour out. A mother named Jennifer shared how her daughter had cried for days after being humiliated by the same teacher. A father named David said his son had started waking up with stomach aches every morning before school. A woman named Maria admitted she had complained to the administration 3 times, but had been told she was being overprotective.
Each story was different, but the pattern was the same. Dismissed concerns, silence from officials, children who suffered quietly. Now, with nearly 100 bikers and dozens of parents standing in unity, the silence ended. 3 local news vans arrived by 5 o'clock. Reporters moved carefully through the crowd, unsure of what story they were walking into. One of them approached Robert and asked, "Sir, can you tell us why you were here?" Robert looked into the camera and said, "I am here because my son was being hurt by someone who was supposed to protect him. I am here because no child should feel small in a place that is supposed to help them grow. And I am here because sometimes silence is the most dangerous sound in a school." Behind him, 97 individuals stood in complete agreement. No threats, no violence. Just one father's pain becoming a voice for many. A voice that would no longer be ignored. At 5:20 in the afternoon, the atmosphere around Springwood Middle had shifted from quiet protest to something impossible to ignore. The school principal, Mrs. Charlotte Green, had stepped outside earlier, her expression unreadable as she looked over the rows of bikers and parents. But now, with news crews broadcasting live and stories pouring out from students and families, the district superintendent had no choice but to act. At 5:30, Dr. Linda Ramirez arrived at the scene along with 2 school board members and the district's legal advisor. She stepped out of a plain black SUV, holding a clipboard, and walked with calm authority toward the center of the gathered crowd. She did not bring a microphone. She did not need one. With cameras rolling and dozens of witnesses around, she looked toward the community and spoke clearly. Effective immediately, Coach Darren Wells is being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. A third-party review will begin tonight. We will be interviewing students, reviewing classroom practices, and taking corrective action where necessary. This district does not tolerate the emotional mistreatment of students by any educator under any circumstance. There was no applause, no cheering, just a collective exhale, as if the weight of silence had finally been lifted. But this moment was not just about one teacher. Over the next 5 weeks, the investigation uncovered a disturbing pattern. More than 20 formal and informal complaints had been made about Coach Wells in the past 4 years. Many of them had been minimized, ignored, or explained away as just his style. Students described feeling anxious before class, dreading school, and in some cases, blaming themselves for not being stronger. Teachers admitted that they had heard things but felt powerless to challenge someone with tenure and influence. The findings could no longer be brushed aside. The district, under public pressure and legal scrutiny, announced a series of sweeping changes. First, cameras would be installed in all classrooms, not for surveillance, but to ensure transparency and protect both students and teachers. Second, a new anonymous reporting system would be created, giving students and parents a safe way to share concerns. Third,
Teachers would be required to complete updated training in trauma-informed education, helping them understand how words, tone, and attitude can affect a child's mental and emotional development. And finally, a new zero-tolerance policy would be adopted for any form of emotional or verbal abuse. These were not just promises, they were contracts with the community. But beyond policy and procedure, the real change happened at home. Ethan transferred to a nearby school where he was welcomed by a counselor on his first day. His new teachers encouraged curiosity, asked him questions about the stars and the books he liked, and most importantly, treated him like someone who mattered. It did not happen overnight, but day by day, the shadows began to lift. He laughed more. He started talking about school again. He began drawing rockets and building models in the garage. One afternoon, 6 months after that day in November, Robert sat on the front porch watching Ethan work on an old bicycle in the driveway. The boy was humming to himself, focused, calm. Robert smiled, remembering the heaviness of that moment in the classroom and how far they had come.
Ethan looked up and grinned. "Dad, want to ride with me later? There's a new trail behind the lake." Robert nodded. "Yeah, son, I'd like that." They rode together that evening under the soft glow of a golden sunset, father and son, side by side. No news cameras, no protests, just peace. And the quiet knowledge that something had been made right, not just for them, but for others who had no voice before. What began as one father's quiet instinct turned into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. Robert Walker did not march with signs or raise his voice. He did not threaten or demand. He simply showed up, paid attention, and refused to walk away when something felt wrong. And because of that one decision, policies were changed, voices were heard, and a community found its courage. Not every act of heroism needs to be loud. Sometimes the strongest statement is the one made in silence, by people who show up not for credit, but because it is the right thing to do. Ethan is no longer the boy who sat hunched in a classroom trying to disappear. He is healing, and his story has helped others find the strength to speak up. Parents across the country saw what happened in Springwood and began asking questions in their own districts. Some found similar patterns. Some found allies. But all of them were reminded that their voice matters, and that no child should ever feel alone or powerless in a place that is supposed to help them grow. The Iron Legacy Riders did not set out to become activists. They were simply friends, brothers, riders with a code. But when one of their own was hurting, they answered the call, not with fists, but with presence, with respect, with solidarity. And their example spread beyond bikes and leather. It became a reminder that strength, when guided by compassion, can protect more than just your own. If this story has spoken to something in you, we invite you to stay connected. Like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Tell us where you are watching from and what part of the story stayed with you. Maybe you are a parent, a teacher, a student, or someone who has seen injustice and did not know what to do next. Let this remind you that paying attention is powerful, that speaking up can change lives, and that when we stand together, we are never truly standing alone. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this, stories that show how everyday people can shape extraordinary change. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice, one moment, and the decision not to look away.